To all of you who are here tonight, it's absolutely heartwarming to have such an amazing response from the town of Augusta for Open the Gate here tonight. So thank you so much for making the time to come out and talk about such an important subject and be together. My name is Laurissa Knowels and I am a counselling psychologist and a celebrant in the local area. So some of you may have come across me before, but for those of you who I haven't met, it is absolutely wonderful to have you here. And I'd just like to start by letting you know a little bit about Open the Gate. So Open the Gate was really the brainchild of Miriam here, who is the chairperson of the Scott River Ball Committee. And we also have Emma, who is here from the Scott River Ball Committee. Oh, she might have just stepped out for a minute, but she's here today. And as some of you may be familiar, the Scott River Ball has been running for quite a few years. It runs every 2 years? 3 years. Yeah. And they always give money to charities. So the main charity that they've always focused on is the Royal Flying Doctors. And they gave some money to that. And then they decided to branch out and have a look at some of the needs in our community. And Miriam came to me and said that she felt like we needed to do a local grassroots focus on mental health and start to get the conversation going about supporting people in our own communities and having things available to them. So we had a bit of a look around and we decided, with the help of Shelley, who you will hear from later also, to put together something and actually start something from the ground up. So that is what Open the Gate is. And what we're doing is starting with these community talks where we come in and we just talk to people in their own towns about issues that are happening and mental health as a whole. And then Shelley will talk to you about the next phase, which is Safe Talks, and that will be part of it. And then we're going to watch where this grows and what the community needs. So it's very much going to be focused on local needs, local knowledge, and all of us helping ourselves in our own communities. So that's what Open the Gate is, and we're really very proud of how far it's come. We've had wonderful, this is the last community talk that we'll be running in this one. So we've been in Scott River, we've been in Nannup, we've been in Alexander Bridge and Carradale, and now we're here. So as you can see, we're taking the focus off Margaret River, Bustleton, those central places that seem to get a lot of support, and saying what do we actually need here in our communities. So that's why we're here. So I would like to start by just telling you a little bit about my own story. So like I said, I'm a counsellor and a celebrant. I'm also a mum. And I moved down to Margaret River when my boys were really tiny. So Dante was under 1 and Zeke was just over 2 years of age, and they are now 18 and 19. Mm-hmm. So I moved down to Witchcliffe from the city and moved onto the farm with my husband and the 2 small boys. And I started to work in the business and to look after the kids. After a little while, it was probably 3 or 4 years, my marriage broke down, which was quite a tough time for me with the 2 small kids and being out on the farm and dealing with the issues that were going on there. So my marriage broke down and I moved into town in Margaret River after a while, but I was on the farm by myself for a while with the boys, which was quite an interesting journey. From there, I was living in town with the boys and I met a really beautiful man. And I met him through the funeral directors who I work for, and he happened to be the neighbour of one of them. So I met Ivy, and when I met him, he was one of the funniest people that I've ever met. He was really good looking, he had glistening blue eyes, and we fell in love quite quickly. And he had 2 girls and I had the 2 boys, so we joked a little bit about the Brady Bunch. And after a couple of years, we decided to get married. And we were actually married at the Malloy Island Caravan Park, out on the Blackwood River there, which was a really beautiful place to be. So Ivy and I built our lives together. We did up a house. He was an auto and marine upholsterer, so very handy, very, very good with his hands and everything that he turned his sights to. So he had his business doing that, and I had my business, and we were raising each other's kids. So you can imagine there was some stresses that came along in all of that. Both having our own businesses meant that even though we did do quite well financially, we couldn't always rely on an income, which was quite tough. And trying to meld the family together was also quite a tough time. When I first met Ivy, and then as time went on, I started to notice some things about him that were of a little bit of concern. He would sometimes get into very dark moods and go off by himself, and I'd find that I couldn't reach him. I'd ask him how he was, and he wouldn't want to talk about it, wouldn't want to answer. And then as time progressed, that seemed to get worse, and we were under quite a lot of pressure. It was a couple of years into our marriage when I took him to my cousin's funeral in Fremantle, and he said to me, "I think my dad's buried here." And I said, "Okay, well, let's find your dad." So we went to the reception of the Fremantle Cemetery and asked where his dad was buried, and they said that he wasn't buried there, that he was actually at Karrakatta. And the point was that Ivy didn't know anything about his father. His mother had never shared that with him. So he had two sisters from that dad that had died, and his dad died when Ivy was 9 months old, and then his mum remarried and he got another 4 sisters. So Ivy was one boy with 6 sisters. So we went that day to Karrakatta to find his dad, and we went to his grave, and on his grave was a beautiful, you know those ceramic pictures? And his dad was there with this massive smile on his face, and Ivy had never seen his dad before. So he fell to the ground and he wept and wept. And that was for, I would say, 20 minutes, which is a long, long time. We found out that, you know, he really struggled with the notion of family, with knowing where he belonged and all those sorts of things. So time progressed, and he ended up with depression and anxiety. He was taking some medication. He did go to some counselling. Our relationship was getting more and more strained, and there was an occasion where we had an argument, and he got very angry with me, and I felt that I had no choice but to leave the house at that time. So I left, and I said that I wouldn't come back until I could feel safe there again. That upset him really, really hugely. And he spent a couple of days in the house by himself, asking me to please come home, and I said, "I will, but I need you to get some proper help. I really, really need you to get some proper help." So it must have been the Thursday that I left, and on the Monday morning I got a phone call from him, and I picked up the phone, and he had attempted suicide. So that was a really, really difficult time. We called the ambulance and the police, and he was taken through to emergency, and then he was taken to Bunbury to the psychiatric unit there, where he was treated for a while. We then went on the seesaw of trying to go up to Perth to get help, seeing psychiatrists, seeing psychologists, trying different medications, trying to take the pressure off him, trying to help him to work if he wanted to work, trying to give him time off if he needed time off. In the middle of all of this, still juggling kids and my work and everything else. It was an incredibly stressful time. He ended up in Exmouth with very, very dear friends, where he could work and have some time to just regroup, and he didn't feel that everyone was looking at him. I flew up to Exmouth and had a most glorious few days with him, and that was actually around this time of the year that happened, which was absolutely beautiful. And while we were up there, he said to me, I'm not going to be here. I won't be here. And I didn't really understand what he meant. But I came home and he came home and packed up some of his stuff, and I got a phone call and text from him, and in the end I said, I've got to work tomorrow, I can't take any more of your calls, I'm putting the phone on silent, please go to bed and we'll talk in the morning. I fell asleep and woke up to some messages on my phone of him saying goodbye, and he had actually taken his own life. So we needed to find him and try and deal with that huge issue of losing somebody that was so integral to all of us, and of watching him go through all of that. And it was at that time that I realised how mental health, you know, it's such a big thing, and so many of us are touched by it. And we need to start talking about it. We need to open conversations. We need to be able to know where supports are, and we need to be real about what's working and not working in our communities. So I miss Ivy so much. He was like one of the most incredible, beautiful people that I ever met, and so broken, and I will love him forever. That's why I guess I'm ultra passionate about this on a personal level as well. But I do want to talk to you about mental health in our own communities and things that we need to look at. So I want this to be quite informal. Let's just have a little think about, can anyone tell me the stresses that you think would be occurring for people in Augusta, like locally? Are there things that you know of that make, that are mental health issues here, or that you know that people in this community are suffering with on that level? Drugs?
Stress for parents.
Mm-hmm.
Because their children, or they're looking after their grandchildren, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's huge.
Unemployment.
Unemployment, yes. Unemployment is a really huge issue for self-esteem, for moving forward. It's a really big one, and I guess Augusta in some ways is becoming smaller as far as employment, is it? Is that right, or?
Not necessarily. No, it's still not a lot.
No. And do a lot of people that live in Augusta need to travel for work?
Yeah, there's a lot of fly in, fly out.
Yeah, so that's a big issue too, isn't it? Yeah. Anything else that comes to mind?
The boys in the back row, the Augusta Fire Brigade. Oh, ladies, sorry.
Yeah, well, we had
stresses that they deal with.
yes, huge, and we had the massive fires, didn't we, at the opening of town? How long ago was that now?
It was January 2018.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's also the guys that don't talk about it.
Mm.
They won't talk about it and what's bothering them.
Yeah, a lot of people
And
find it
they've got a
hard.
lot of resources to go to, even when there is people that are asking for help, you can't get help.
Yeah.
There's so many strings that have got to go through, loops and all that. It's exhausting
big
for the
gap.
families concerned, let alone the patients that maybe wanting to get help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is something that has been echoed. A lot of these issues have been echoed, but certainly the red tape or the really cumbersome process that you need to go to get help seems to leave a lot of people feeling, that they can't access it, or...
There is a really good service here at the doctor's surgery that you can get referred to see a lady called Eve,
Mm-hmm.
who's a counsellor, and
Yes.
she's magic.
Great.
And she's very busy here.
Yes,
So she's got a waiting list, but she's very productive.
that's good. So, yeah, because I think it is also, like we found in the Scott River especially, for the people in more isolated communities, if you have to go to Bustleton or Margaret River to access a counsellor or a psychiatrist or, a mental health nurse, sometimes it just makes it too hard by the time you're working and trying to juggle everything. You don't go as often as you should, or you fall off And that's a really hard thing. So it's lovely to hear that that's here, and that's certainly something that we need to be aware of as we're moving forward, of making services available. And also, I think, from what I can see, people with local knowledge, like, you know, how there's phone helplines, and I'm not knocking those sorts of things, but it's maybe sometimes hard for those people to understand what we're facing in our communities. So that's really great to have a local counsellor, and hopefully, you know, I know that there's others as well, but we can keep working towards those things. So I also just wanted to talk to you about some of the things that I see that cause massive stress for people. And of course, the first one is relationships. Relationships are incredibly hard, whether it be marriages, partnerships, parenting, looking after elderly people in our communities, friendships. When you're struggling in relationships, it's a really difficult thing, and I think sometimes that's a hard thing to admit, like to turn to your friends in your community and say, I'm really struggling in my marriage, or I'm really struggling with my child. And that's something that impacts so many of us at different stages in our lives, because there's no perfect relationships. And we all go through major stress. And it's really, really difficult sometimes to be able to connect in with those that you love, to let them know how much you love them, to talk about the things that are important to you with them. Something that I often say to couples is, you know, sometimes we throw out just the common niceties of using manners with the person that you love. Or, you know, you might have told them a few years ago that you loved them, but what about telling them a little bit more often so that they can hear it, or telling them the things that you love about them, or saying thank you for the wonderful things that people do for you in your lives, you know? Those sorts of things are really, really important, and being able to have people you can confide in and talk to when you are struggling in your relationship is a really, really big thing. I also think that the roles that so many of us play are incredibly hard. We're all quite time poor, and by the time we work and we look after our families and we try to volunteer, especially in smaller communities that need to be held up, there's often just not enough time left for ourselves or to juggle things, and there's a lot of responsibility that people feel to take on, to look after their families, to look after people that they're working with, to look after people that are their friends. So that's a really big stress that we see. Financial pressure. I think that's a huge one that causes issues for so many of us. Feeling that we can't make ends meet, feeling that the bills are mounting up, feeling that we're working so hard but there still doesn't seem to be enough money, or to get things moving along the way that we wish they would. Also, we all have different ideas on how to spend money and where it's best spent, and how to manage it, and what are priorities, so that causes problems in families and relationships. And there's a lot of pride as well around money. That's another thing that we don't want to talk about. You know, it's really hard to say, no, I can't come out because I don't have enough money to pay for dinner. Or, no, you know, I feel like the air conditioner's broken and I'm cold, but I don't have the money to fix it. Or, you know, all these types of things are really, really hard for people that are struggling and to be aware of. And the finances, you know, they affect us all. And there is a lot of pride that exists in that area. Family. Family's a huge one. You know, there's conflict in so many families. If there's no perfect relationships, there's certainly no perfect families. But how do you cope when you aren't getting along with a member of your extended family or a member within your family? And it feels like your emotions are being eroded and you can't represent yourself, or you don't feel comfortable in family situations, or, you know, we're struggling, like Emma said, you know, grandparenting, parenting, feeling disrespected and like you've got nowhere to go, and that's from young people and older people. That whole way of how to communicate and navigate your way through family relationships is a massive pressure. There's also within properties and in succession planning, inheritances, wills, who does what within families, these sorts of things, grief, loss, all massive issues for people. And a lot of times we don't know the answers or where to turn when we're struggling in some of those areas. I think too, there seems to be, I call it the vanilla veneer, but there's this need to act as though everything's always okay, and to smile and to move on. And it's really hard to say, I'm struggling, or things are hard for me at the moment, and to talk about that. We seem to sometimes just need to act to get through, and that's a very lonely place to be. If you're acting like you're okay, but you're not, it's a really, really tough thing to manage. I also really want to talk about the signs of depression and what depression is. So there are two broad types of depression. There's reactive or situational depression, and there's chemical depression. And reactive or situational depression comes about due to an incident or a number of incidences in our lives. So for instance, when my husband died, I experienced grief and I experienced depression because of that loss. That's a reactive or situational depression, because I became depressed because he died. And that's how we're built. That's what's meant to happen, although we can often get stuck in it, and it can be incredibly debilitating. The other type of depression is a chemical depression, which in very general terms comes from a lack of serotonin, but there's more reasons for that. But people can feel depressed and not know why, or not be able to isolate it. And then of course there's the combination. So these things don't exist. You don't have one or the other necessarily. You often have a combination of situational depression and chemical depression. And it's really important to be able to talk about that and find ways of handling it before it takes you over or you feel too terrible. It's a really, really hard and deep hole for some people to be in. Signs of depression, and I'm sure that many of you, again, these things can happen to all of us, but sleeping too much or not sleeping enough, it's a sign of depression. Overeating or undereating, another sign of depression. Self-medication, things like alcohol, drugs, burying yourself in your work, burying yourself into your phone, burying yourself into the television, all those sorts of things. If you're doing anything in an extreme, that can be a sign of depression. Not engaging in the ways that you normally would. So if you'd normally be part of a sporting group, or you'd normally go to church, or you'd normally be a volunteer firey, and suddenly you don't feel that you can do that. Those sorts of things are real warning signs of depression. And I think a really deep sign of depression, or something that I use with a lot of my clients, is if you feel that you're existing in the world but you're not connecting, or you can't feel the feelings. So if you hear a really good joke and you know it's funny but you can't really laugh, or you've got a really beautiful child or a gorgeous pet and they're doing something funny right in front of you, or they're showing you love, and you know that you're meant to feel that feeling that you feel in those cases, but it's not happening. You feel kind of like you're observing what's going on instead of being inside of yourself. That's another really deep sign of depression. So they're the kinds of things that we need to look out for in ourselves and in others that we love and around the community. I also think loneliness is a really huge thing, and I don't know, but I imagine that for some of the elderly in our communities here, and for many others, that loneliness can cause huge depression, and it can be something that we definitely need to look out for as well. So from all of these things, I guess, if you are feeling depressed, what can you do? A lot of people will say things like, oh, counselling won't help, there's no point. Well, I can tell you that for some people it is amazing to get things off your chest, to find some strategies, to have a confidential place where you can be heard, to explore your feelings with somebody can be really, really helpful. A lot of people come into my rooms and say, I don't know why I'm here, it's not going to help. And then it doesn't take very long, and pretty soon they're like, yeah, I'd like to come back. It's just having that support can be really amazing. Also, going to your doctor and discussing how you're feeling and getting it down, and if you do need medication or not, to actually look into those sorts of things. To talk about your general health, to look at your general health is a really important thing if you're feeling depressed, because there can be several reasons, even physically, as to why that can be happening. To find that balance in your life. So often when we're feeling depressed, it's because we're not taking care of ourselves enough. The self-care, the nutrition, the sleep, the exercise, all of those sorts of things are very important, and we often throw a lot of those things out when we're feeling low. I also do want to touch on drug and alcohol use because we know that it's a massive issue for so many of us and in our communities. And even though at Open the Gate we have decided to, in these community meetings, to make social drink available, we need to know the difference between a social drink or when we're using it for the wrong reasons or using those things to excess. And again, that's a really hard one to sometimes admit and put it out there and let people know that you're struggling. So there are wonderful supports for drug and alcohol abuse and use in our communities, and I do encourage you to access those, or if you know of someone that needs them, to do so, because we do have specialists that can help, and it is a really massive issue. So I guess that brings me really towards the end of my talk. Something that I think is really important, and I have touched on, is self-care. It's taking the time to do the things that you love, whether that be reading a book, having a sleep, going for a walk, going for a swim, spending time with friends. You know, don't miss those parts out of your life. They're really, really important in moving forward and having balance and feeling good. So do take care of yourself. Make yourself a priority. It's most important in mental health to be able to do that, and to know what you need in situations, and then to feel okay to give it to yourself. I also just want to say that it's really hard. It's really hard to broach some of these subjects, but sometimes by Open the Gate, it's just about turning up and being on someone's doorstep. It's about asking them out for a coffee. It's about asking them how they are and stopping to actually listen to the answer. It's about noticing people that seem to be struggling or doing things tough, and letting them know that you care. And those sorts of things are things that we can all do. So I encourage you, when you feel that you can, to open the gate, to reach out for others, to look out in the community for people that need us, and to have the hard conversations, because through that we're all going to move forward and feel much better about supporting each other and supporting ourselves. I just wanted to end with a little story, and this story is called Naked Crabs. At the seashore, every pool and puddle left by the retreating tide seems to have a crab in it. Little ones scuttle sideways, squeezing under rocks, peering from a patch of seaweed. occasionally venturing out to nibble unwary human toes. On the beach, shells of crabs lie washed up by waves. Some are from crabs that died. Others are simply discarded, a dwelling too small for its growing occupant. That's how crabs grow bigger. When their shells get too tight, they split the shell open and grow a new one. I've never talked with a crab, but I imagine the process of splitting open a shell must be painful. I'm sure that until they grow a new shell, they're terribly defenceless and vulnerable, because that's how we humans feel when we crack open our shells. Our shells aren't visible like crabs, but they are there just the same. Shells that form by years of habit, shells that protect us from other people, shells that are the roles we play as parents or kids or bosses or employees. Every now and then, we crack our shells open and emerge into a new world, quivering and defenceless. Teenagers do it as they become adults. No wonder they get crabby sometimes. Adults do it as we learn to quit running our kids' lives, or when we get laid off at work, or when a wife or husband dies and we have to start over again, alone, when an investment fails, when a dream disappears. In all of these traumas of life, a shell is being broken and a new and vulnerable life is started. Like a crab, the longer that shell has been growing around us, the harder it is to break open, to start again, the more painful the breaking becomes. Some of our shells we have worn for generations. Our beliefs can be a shell, handed down by our ancestors. Some beliefs are worth keeping. Others may have become prisons, shells so encrusted with the barnacles of the past, so burdened with trailing weeds, so constricting that we can no longer move when life calls. No one looks for painful experiences in life. To avoid pain, we may prefer to stay locked into shells that no longer fit very well, rather than risk the vulnerability of cracking them open. But when a crab's shell becomes too thick, too protective, too tough to crack open and start again, then the crab can't grow anymore. And that is when it dies, and so do we. So thank you. I do encourage you to open the gate and to talk to us, and let's see what special things we can make happen here in our own communities. Thank you.